So here's the Momo steering wheel that's used in the Evo 8 and Evo 9. I've already stripped this down. The leather that was on there was in terrible condition. It had been basically baked into plastic by the sun. It mostly peeled off decently all the way around here. Now these things are done with two different pieces of leather. There's a smooth leather all around, and up here there's like a textured leather that goes on there, and it's all glued into the seam. I'm not a fan of having two separate pieces. I'd rather it be one solid continuous wrap. I mean, it did hold up over the years, but still it looked less than nice when I took it apart. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in this gap, which is going to help me when I wrap this to have less of an appearance of a groove here. There'll still be somewhat of an appearance of a groove, but that's okay. That can be a feature, right, in the leather and look okay. I just don't want it to be that deep, because while I could tuck leather in here and it's all one wrap and it'll look nice, you run the possibility that it could fail there, in the sense of it can come unglued and then you'd have like a loose flap of leather in that region. So I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill this. Now, if I were to fill this with black silicone, most of you would not complain or say anything. However, silicone is not good about letting things stick to it. So most likely the contact cement would have some issues adhering there. What I'm going to use, and some idiot is going to jump in the comments and criticize without understanding or using their brain, but what I'm going to use is caulking. The reason I'm going to use caulking is, one, because it's flexible and can fill something like this, and two, because caulking is designed to be absorbent, right, so that you can paint it and things like that, which means that it will allow the contact cement to get a good bond to it, and that will then allow me to have a filler here that I can glue leather on over and have a nice fitment. Alright, so one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make some small holes throughout this groove, and that's just going to serve as a point for the caulking to grab onto with a little bit of extra strength. So I'll put one here. Alright, this stuff doesn't really like to be drilled into. So I made some very, very small holes. Get the foam out of there a little bit. Do the same around back. So allow that to dry, and then I'll come back in and add a little more caulking around these corners just to reduce them, because I couldn't really fill them in flat. Might do another layer on the back as well. Alright, so about a half an hour ago I shot this down with some self-attaching primer. I did 3 coats and allowed 1 minute in between, just following what the instructions on the can said. And you should always follow the instructions on the can. You'll be surprised how much better your final results will be when you do that. Now, I allowed it, like I said, 30 minutes to dry after the final coat. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint that in black. Alright, so I'm going to spray the back of this first, then I'll turn around and spray the front. The back will only get 1 coat, the front is going to get a few, just so that it's nice and tough. According to the instructions, we have to wait 10 minutes between coats, so I'm going to set a timer and do exactly that. Alright, time for coat number 2. Alright, 1 final coat and this thing is done. Got the steering wheel face painted. It's now like a satin to flat black. The next thing that I need to do is to prep for leather wrap. Now I'm gonna have 1 seam on my leather and it's gonna be down here. I've noticed that the factory Evo is like that. Now typically when you have a seam in leather, you can skive the leather so it doesn't really bunch up where the seam is. You just lay the 2 parts of the seam flat here. However, you could also cut a groove, and that's what I'm going to do because I've had better results with that. So I'm going to just go ahead and mark the center here. I'll use this circle, right, to kind of help me, this little circular hole, figure out where that is. I'll just kind of align my ruler here to about the center point of that, and that's not going to be visible, by the way, so I can actually mark it and just kind of draw a straight line all the way here. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm kind of going to just lay something flexible like a zip tie around here to act as a straight edge around the curvature, and I'll draw all the way around. You could freehand this if you wanted to, but I'd like it to be as straight as possible because I'm going to be cutting out material here, and that's where the leather seam is going to sit. Of course, it kind of seems counterintuitive. You would think because you've cut out material that you would feel some kind of hole there, but actually because the seam of the leather sits there, it always feels rock solid. So don't let that dissuade you from using this technique. Anytime you see someone do like a steering wheel with 4 seams, that's what they're doing. They're grooving it And anytime you see a steering wheel with like carbon fiber and then leather meeting, there's a groove there where the two parts meet. So it's a normal tactic. Alright, so that's where we're going to cut this thing. Alright, so really quickly, I'm just going to apply a little bit of contact cement inside this seam. And then I'm going to seal it shut once and for all. And I'll cut off the excess. I just do that to make the seam nice and strong. So for now I'm going to kind of fold it back just to spread it out and be able to work on it. Let that chill for a little bit, and then I'll just dab it all together. Alright. Move that together real nice. We'll let that set and then we'll come back and cut the excess off this seam. Trim off this excess. Just kind of come a little ways out of the stitching. Beautiful. Nice short little ridge. Wait, I'm gonna tuck this up in the leather. That way when this tucks up into the steering wheel, it doesn't have to go that far. Alright, so I've left my steering wheel in the freezer. As you can see, it's pretty cold. Left the leather out in the sun. And hopefully we get nice and warm. So let's see if we can install this without too much drama. If you did this correctly, measurement wise, the leather should not fit over your steering wheel, which is why I have to do this. Basically, you put this in the sun so it becomes stretchy, and you put the steering wheel in the freezer so that it contracts from the cold. Right, and you should end up in a situation where it's not as difficult to get over. Unfortunately, it looks like the sun shifted while I was distracted, so this leather's not all that hot, but it looks like it's gonna slide on, and that's all I need. Looks like it'll work. So basically using my thumb here to kind of push a little bit of material and then tugging. That seems to be working decent. Keep doing that and then I'll come back when this is done. So At this point, the leather is now fitted to the wheel. Now, there wasn't really much to show, basically just me fighting with this leather, tugging it over, then trying to get it as even as I could front to back, right? Then a lot of adjusting, kind of like rolling it this way, right? Like, let's say counterclockwise, so I can get the seam to align and sit properly in the groove that I cut into the wheel. And that's just gonna let this, right, be pretty even side to side, the center seam. I'll glue this down just to make sure that it stays perfect, and then I'll be working my way around, slowly removing a little bit of material around here so that this all can fold and conform to the spokes. But you can already kind of see how this is going to start to take shape. And one of the things that I like to do is I actually like to leave this out in the sun, because that softens the leather and kind of just starts draping it where it needs to go. And then once that's kind of like showing its form, I'm going to go around through the center, cutting this perfectly up to the center seam. Something I didn't get on video was I always beforehand take these steering wheels, and there's a kind of like a parting line in the center of all of them. You just take a blade and score a cut through that, like a little channel, and then later I'm going to cut into the leather and just run the blade through the channel, and that'll line this perfectly on that edge. I'll glue all of this down, then flip it over, and then basically pull over the back, you know, amount of material over that seam and cut it again and glue that down, and then this will be perfectly wrapped in leather. After that, I can mark out all my holes for my stitching, and then we can start the stitching process. As you guys can see, this is quickly going from just a hobby or one or two from my own personal cars and kind of ballooning into a bit of a small business here. So I'm going to get a business name registered really soon and start offering these for sale for you guys. These are going to be, I'm going to have a website that I'm going to sell them through, and I'll start promoting that. But once that's ready, I will definitely make an announcement here on the channel and on social media, so you guys can check that out. So you can see, if you got a Supra, I got you there on the right. If you have an IS, I have you there on the left. That's just going to be a ton of these coming out. Then I'm also going to do S2000s, Acura RSXs. Evo is kind of a one-off unless I can find a decent source for those. Those are not as common or easy to pick up, but I'm definitely going to be offering reupholstered steering wheels for a few different cars. And of course, we're not just going to stick with leather. I've got a thing for Alcantara now, so I'm going to mess around with a little bit of Alcantara and leather and just give you guys options that you can try out. So for now, my biggest concern is just making sure that this stays centered. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some contact cement just to make sure. Okay. See, it's nice and it's exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and apply cement carefully so that I don't damage anything. Whenever possible, you want to always try to get it on both surfaces. Right, that just guarantees a nice adhesion. Just let that dry up and then I'll fold this down. Alright, the surface of the glue looks pretty set, so just drop this down. Nice. The first little bit starts to take shape. This is always the fun part, setting the first spoke. This kind of sets the tone for the rest of the wrap. So once you have this, everything follows from there. Do this right, and the rest isn't guaranteed, but it's close. Already gives you the idea of what it's all going to start to look like as it takes shape, which is always nice. I'm going to do the back side of this. By the way, if you do manage to get some contact cement on the outside of the leather, don't touch it. Let it dry. Once it's dry, it peels right off in one strip. The key way to not let it drip onto the leather is to do this from in here and not come from outside and risk dropping stuff onto it. That tack up and come back and glue it down. Let's fold this down. Make sure it all stays there in the tunnel. Alright. Make sure I tuck this well into the groove. It lays nice and flat. Alright. Pretty happy with that. So now I know what that's gonna look like. It's going to look great. This steering wheel in general is going to look fantastic when it's ready. I'm really excited to see this thing done. I've never upholstered an Evo before. I've done any number of Supra ones at this point, so it's definitely going to be fun. Just let that thing dry overnight. So this thing glued down here, the next phase is to start cutting some reliefs into this leather so that it can really start to conform before I really line it up to the exact center where I'm going to cut it by. So I'm going to take my leather pen here and I'll just kind of like push it so that the leather goes, you know, down a bit, and I'm going to cut it like well past the amount of material that I need. Let me grab another leather pen. I feel like this one's coming out. Alright, so we'll leave excess material beyond what we need just to make sure that we don't overcut, right? Obviously, like, this is gonna leave plenty to go over the edges. One way to do this is you can just kind of like put it down on the surface so that it's flat, and you'll know that that's more than enough because it goes all the way across and down. Alright. And I'll sort of do that all the way around here. Now what that's going to get me is there will be less tension in the leather, which will allow it to better conform. And there's not very much tension around the top here too, or like I could probably just directly go for it, but let's take our time here. There's no need to rush. So with that set up, let's go ahead and actually just start cutting that out. Obviously, I don't need to be perfectly on those lines. They're really just for guidance, so I don't go too far. You could do this by eye and not even mark if you had to. Alright, but see, now that I cut that, there's even less tension in the material, so I can really kind of fold it over and start getting more of a feel for how it's going to look. Plus I can actually, you know, if I want, start gluing it down and then start slicing through. I'll do the same around the back, and then we'll start working with cutting this down, getting it exactly where it needs to be, and gluing it. So for this phase of the leather fitting, all I'm going to need is my scissors, leather pen, and some kind of little wedge tool. I got this from a little electronics kit for working on cell phones. Probably get something similar, just a little metal wedge. But basically what I do with this is, right, like I'm gonna fold the leather down in a section, like here, and get it to where it's fitting nice. Then I'll come here, I'll kind of just stab this into that groove that I cut in here, right? That little groove that shows where the center point is. Poke it in there and leave it rested here. Now, I'll mold my leather down to where it needs to be. And because this is in the way, this is marking where that center point is, I can do this, and now I have a mark there. And I can kind of move across and keep doing the same thing over and over, right? And I don't have to do it, you know, edge to edge. I can leave a gap and then come back and interpolate that marking. But I'm going to do it just for a section here towards the center. And then I'll probably do it on another section over here by the thumb rest, right? And then I'll interpolate the path all the way through, and I'll cut that out with my scissors, right? And the goal really is to, right, have this cut where it needs to go right up to the edge and be able to have this front face done. And once I'm happy with a portion of this, actually, before I even interpolate the rest and do any cutting, what I tend to do is I glue this down, right? And that just kind of helps hold this in place so I can keep fitting the leather, because as you've noted at this point, it tends to, right, need to be wrinkled into place, right? So in order for you to get it to conform and keep it conforming as you make more lines, you're going to want to do that. So right here, right, I'll just kind of draw a line, then I'll kind of do this. That's the way I'm going to cut it, so I'm not into where I need to be for the rest of the line. Now, these lower ones aren't really hard and fast rules. They're more what we call guidelines. So these are a little bit closer to needing to be precise, but not that much either, to be honest. Of course, the goal is to just kind of have a clean and straight edge. Alright, so that's about my center point. So, next phase is I'll likely glue this bit and do some more work that way and keep going. You could tie this down instead of gluing it if you wanted to. I just think gluing it is nicer, better hold, and it's more permanent. It's already done for you. You don't have to go back and glue it later. If you look, I've already kind of followed this process around here, and as you can see, it's all fitting really nicely. You'll notice that when I glue it down, right, I have the final contours in the corners. When I glue it down, I take a strip of leather and I tie it down, and that's to force it to conform into the corners. If you just put glue there and you put it down, you're gonna find that the corners are gonna want to pull off, and so you'll have this annoying like floating leather piece. And especially if you have that up here where your thumb rest goes, when you're driving, your thumbs are sitting here, that really irritates your thumbs. It hurts over time. You don't want that. You want it to sit nice and flat. So that's why I do this. This is literally to ensure that the leather conforms really nice into the curvature. You want to always do that. Basically been gluing this and then putting in the little piece of metal, alright, my little metal blade, and continuing to draw lines, glue a bit, draw more lines, cut, glue a bit, draw more lines, cut. I'll do some more of that right now. Always molding the leather and working the leather as you do to make sure you're lining it up correctly. So now, just kind of tug the leather in a position. Make sure I'm happy with the line as drawn, which I am. Alright, it looks like it's following proper course. Cut that. Then we'll do the next gluing session. Alright, when I glue, I turn on the big industrial fan, so you're going to hear some noise, but just keeps the fumes away from me, and also actually helps to dry the stuff a little quicker so it tacks up fast and I can put the leather down. As you do this, you're always going to be continuing to kind of work the leather with your fingers, getting it, you know, to fit into the crevices. And you gotta keep working it. It'll kind of wrinkle into itself and conform to the shape little by little. You just gotta have patience and keep doing it, you know. And this is one reason why, like, if someone sells you a leather steering wheel wrap made from a pattern, I always find that a little iffy as far as fitment goes, because the fit, you really have to mold the leather to the item. So if I took this off right now and I traced a pattern, yeah, it would be close, but the person installing it would still need to know how to really work leather, force leather in the corners, get it to conform. And I've found that when you transition this onto a pattern, it's not always the most accurate. So it's definitely a thing, it can be done, but I'd rather work without it. Now for this corner, in order to make this easier, I'm going to remove some material, just a little bit, just a hair of material, just to allow it to conform, and obviously less than what I need to reach that center line, because I can see how much I need in here, right? It's probably around there. But I'm just going to remove about yay much. That little amount, just make it easier to get this down, and when I'm working with the little blade, we'll make it a little bit less tense. So that just helps me to get this to conform really nicely as I'm working and drawing the line and cutting it. I really, if I wanted to, could probably fold this down and just freehand the entire line here. I really don't need to use the blade, but just for the sake of accuracy, I like to do it and then just freehand a couple points in between. Now, that's about it for today's episode. In the following episode, you'll see me fit all the back and then start prepping, right, all the holes for the stitching, and then I'll start going into how I stitch this. If you guys have enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like this, feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I post up another one. If you have any feedback or any questions, feel free to leave that in the comments section, and as always, thank you guys for watching.